Hello, friends. Welcome back to week 5 of Introduction to Biblical Languages. This week we're going to be doing more with verb tenses and moods. Uh, as I say right here, and you can see in the bold in the lecture, this is not to memorize. Do not memorize this. This is for reference. Okay, I want you to have a better idea of what your translators have access to and the kind of choices that they're making when they're translating the Bibles that you're reading. And so this is a good way for you to see not only what kind of grammar they're using and what they're trying to convey, but what other options there are. So the reason I'm doing this as an audio to go along with your referencing the lecture is that there's some iconography in here that may not make sense to you without me actually explaining it, and I think this is just a better lecture overall to have some audio to go along with it. So I hope it doesn't bore you too much. Let's jump in though. Starting off with the present and imperfect tenses. Here's 4 different ways that these tenses can be used in the text to nuance kind of what the author is trying to communicate. The first option you'll see here, I've created a little chart with past, present, and future quadrants. They're not really quadrants, I guess, because you need 4, whatever. We won't get into that. But basically 3 spaces that represent different aspects of time that the verb is communicating. And so in your first option for the present tense, we have what is called the instantaneous present. In this, the author is simply trying to communicate that there is something that is happening in the present, and it is instantaneous and has no continuation implied. And so then the example is simply he goes. So you'll notice I represent that by just putting a dot in the present portion of that little chart. Okay, he goes is what the author is trying to communicate. So if you come across a present tense where you think that's the case, then the best way to translate it is with the simple present of English. Okay. The next is what we call the progressive, and this is represented by a line in the present because it's attempting to communicate something that is happening in the present and continuing. Okay, so he is going. That is, he is currently in the act of going somewhere, and it's still happening when I'm telling you about it. All right, so that is the present progressive. The third kind of present is the iterative present, and I have represented this by a bunch of little dots because it's this idea that that something is happening, not necessarily continuing, but happening over and over again. So he is, you wouldn't say he is slapping the person, you would say he slaps and slaps and slaps and slaps. So he slaps repeatedly, or he goes and goes and goes and goes. He goes repeatedly. The author in the text can do this just by putting something in the present tense. No need for an adverb like we would do in English. But if you want to communicate that in English, you need to make sure that you put in an adverb like repeatedly to communicate to the audience that that's what you think the author intends to communicate. Okay? And then the final and the most philosophically important and theologically important, the gnomic present. Notice I've got a line extending from past to future with arrows in both directions. And the idea is that whatever is said about the person in this kind of present tense is a timeless fact. So, for instance, in 1 John, when it says God is love, we don't assume that this means that he is currently love or that he was love at some point and it's continuing into the present. No, he is love as a general, timeless fact. If this is essentially an essence of God's being, that he just is this, then the present isn't attempting really to express any sort of time in the present. It just is true about that person or thing. Okay, so those are the 4 options, and then you'll notice that we have some similar options for the imperfect tense just in the past. So we have the progressive imperfect, just like the progressive present, but in the past. So instead of he is going, he was going. All right. Uh, then we have something that's not really in the present tense, but is in the imperfect, and that is the ingressive. Uh, is something that emphasizes when an action began and its continuation. So he began going to the store or to the temple, perhaps. And then we also have the iterative, which once again is just like the present iterative, but in the past, and that's represented with these little dots. All right. He was going repeatedly instead of he is or goes repeatedly. Okay. All right, let's move on to the aorist and future. Now you'll notice with the aorist that I don't have any of these little graphs. That's because the aorist doesn't really happen in time. The aorist is simply a kind of verb that states an action and boils it down into an instantaneous kind of idea. It doesn't really try to imply anything past, present, or future. It's just an action that has happened. So usually in English we communicate that by putting it in the past tense. Therefore, aorist is most simply construed as our simple past. He went, he died, he lied, he cried. Rhyming, but you get the point. Uh, so the different options for aorist aren't going to have a little time graph because they just simply don't need it. The different types of aorist are the constative aorist, which is just, like I said, the simple idea of boiling it down to something that happened. Example, he went. You can have the progressive aorist, or I'm sorry, the ingressive aorist, just like you do with the ingressive imperfect. But here, instead of he began going, you have he began to go. Something that's just boiled down into one point in time. He began to go. The consummative or culminative uh, emphasizes the activity with the cessation of an activity without any reference to the continuing effects. So this is kind of like the perfect without the nuance of the continuing effects. So we just translate it like a perfect. He has gone, but we don't mean that the effects of his going continue on into the future like we would with the perfect tense. And then the epistolary aorist, which is used by authors to describe events from the time frame of uh, the author. So the simple example of this is, I wrote this letter. Well, I'm actually currently writing it, but from your perspective, I wrote it. So uh, I wrote this letter to you in order to say this. And then if it's in the third person, he has written this letter to you in order to communicate this, right? He has written it? No, he's currently writing it, but from your perspective, when you actually get the letter, he will have written it. So he has written it. Uh, it's something we do in English all the time. We just don't have a word for it. Now we've created one, the epistolary aorist. All right, moving on to the future, we have the predictive future, which is the only one that has time, and I'll explain that as we move along. The predictive future is just this idea that you assume that someone is going to do something in the future. There's no continuation implied, it's just going to happen at some point in the future. The example, he will go, he will say, he will do. There's no reference to he will be doing it for a period of time. It's just a simple idea that you assume that this is going to happen in the future. All right. The imperatival future. This is used for commands anytime you see that one of the Ten Commandments quoted from the Old Testament in the New Testament, they will use the imperatival future. You shall not do this, you shall do this, you shall go, you shall not go. So that will be determined by context. And then we have the deliberative future. Easy to recognize because it's going to be in a question. If there's a future tense with a question, it's a deliberative future. Should you go and do this in the future? That's the easiest one to recognize by far. All right, and then let's move on to the perfect and pluperfect. You'll notice that they are identical. There's intensive, resultative, extensive, consummative, and present force, past force. Okay, so they just mirror each other all the way down. So I'm just going to go over the perfect tense, and then you can make sense of the pluperfect. You'll notice that there's a new kind of iconography here. The parentheses. So we have the event that happened, that's the little period, and then the parentheses are the result of that effect into the present for the perfect tense, and then into the past where it stops before it gets to the present in the pluperfect. Okay, so the intensive resultative perfect. This idea is that there's an event that happened in the past and its results continue on into the present, but the author is emphasizing the results. So he has gone, and that going is continuing to have effects into the present. Um, it'd probably be easier to use a different verb. I was just trying to keep it consistent. But it ends up being translated more like a progressive present because we want to emphasize that the results of his going are still going on. And so we move it more towards the present to focus on the results. On the other hand, the extensive consummative emphasizes the past action that happened. It does have continuing results into the present, but we put the emphasis on the past event that happened. So he has gone and continues going. Okay, is kind of the implication. Whereas the first one was he is gone and is continuing to go. Okay, it's just where you put the emphasis. And then finally, you have something that mimics the gnomic present, but is slightly different. Um, it's this idea that the present force perfect is this idea that he knew something in the past. Its effects, the effects of knowing that, have continued on to the present, so much so that he just knows. Okay, that's the basic idea of the present force perfect. It's pretty rare, so that's why it's number 3 on the list. Focus on the first two, and then you'll see that the pluperfect has the same exact thing, only in the past. Instead of he is going, he was going. Instead of he has gone, he had gone. Instead of he knows, he knew. All right, so those are your basic tense grammar points. I'm going to post a separate video to go over some of the moods. This is probably enough for you to chew on for a few hours. So take in what you can. We'll practice it this week. We'll do the worksheet and just try to absorb as much as we can. Hope you guys are having fun. See you soon.